Okay, let's do a quick check. I see Dr. Janie here. Let's see. Dr. Mike, are you in the space? I see you, sir. Okay. Great. Well, I think we should go ahead and get started, just in honor of your time. Okay, so this meeting is being recorded. So if you have colleagues who wanted to make it and were not able to today, we'll prepare this and we'll send it out. Actually, we'll give you an alert or a notification that it's been sent out, and then we'll direct you to the space in our Impact Exchange. And I'll talk about that in just another little bit. But everyone, welcome to a critical conversation. We are so thankful that that we're able to come together to talk about this in this space. I know this is a completely trying time for a lot of us on here, some who are not. And then we are continuing to be reminded of what our families are going through in Eastern Kentucky and so many other places around the nation and the world. I'm Phyllis Clark. I serve as one of two associate directors here for the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative. Many of you I have met, whether it be virtually or in person, and have now been able to spend time with you either on your campuses or right here in our family room, right? So glad to be your facilitator for today. We're going to be together for another hour, but if you have to leave for other obligations, again, please know that we are recording the session. Both my colleagues, Dr. Beth Pennington and Dr. Lily Massa-McKinley, our executive director, are on here with me. So I just want to quickly go through a couple of our little housekeeping things. And I'm going to try to share my screen just so I can show you roughly the agenda, and then it's going to go away and I'm not going to bring it back. All right, so let's just glance at it together. And actually, before we do that, if you all don't mind, if we can just maybe take 30 seconds. I know that little bell is ringing. People are coming into the family room. If we can just take a second and just think about all of our families that have been impacted, colleagues, other staff as well. And so however you feel in your heart and in your mind to think about those folks, can we just do that for 1 second? Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we'd like for you to do right this second, if you don't mind, just kind of going into the chat and putting in your name, please, and your institution and your role. I think we're all used to doing that now, so just knock that right on out. Put that in the chat. Again, since we're recording, we'll be able to keep and document who was here and so forth. The other thing, if you don't mind renaming yourself, I think we're used to that as well. So if you go up to the top, I want to say it's, if you're looking at your screen, it's the top right corner. And just scroll down and you'll see a little option to rename yourself. And I just did that. But feel free to put, you know, NKU, EKU, whatever your institution is. Okay, let's just take a moment to do that. Okay, and as we move through that, I'd like for you to remember, if everyone could just mute themselves. You can be on camera, you can be off camera. This is not a webinar. This is, you know, the typical style of Zoom that I think we're all familiar with. So please watch your mute buttons. We are going to hold all of the questions until we get to a Q&A portion, and that will actually happen at around 2:30. So just a couple of quick perspectives. We have, hopefully you've already seen the information that we sent out. So, you know, we have guests from FIU and from University of Louisiana at Monroe who will be speaking to us, as well as one of our very own. Yeah, we're going to hold all of the questions, but I would ask you, if you have something burning, to go ahead and put that question in the chat, And then we're going to try to pay attention to that once we get to the Q&A, and then we'll address it then. Otherwise, you can just raise your hand, use that feature to raise your hand. Okay. All right, so let's transition now. I want to show you quickly the agenda. So I'm going to share my screen. Crossing my fingers that this is going to work the way I planned for it to. And if it doesn't, we're just going to move forward. So our agenda quickly, I think we've already gotten through the preliminaries, and then we're going to have a quick at-home perspective by Dr. Beth Pennington. She's our Associate Director. And then we're going to move into some disaster response insights and some lessons learned. And so our guests today are Dr. Janie Valdez. Dr. Janie, am I saying that right? Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Perfectly.
Great. And she is the Assistant Vice President of Enrollment Management and Services at Florida International University. We also have Dr. Mark Harant. Am I saying that right, sir?
No, it's just,
Oh, okay. One out
I
of
tell people to hickify it as much as you can, and it's called ARANT.
ARANT.
That's it.
Okay, I got it now. Thank you. He is the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, University of Louisiana at Monroe, and a Professor of Chemistry. Then we'll transition to our campus Q&A, and then I want to leave you all with a couple of pieces of information regarding next steps and some resources that we want to share with you as well. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing, and I would like for Dr. Beth, if you don't mind, to come on camera. And it was interesting. You've been sharing a little bit now of what you've been going through at home. And I believe it would be helpful for all of our colleagues here to understand some of that as well. So if you don't mind sharing, just take about 5 minutes and however you wish.
Sure, I'll be glad to do so, and hopefully my internet connection stays stable. So if I freeze, I apologize in advance. But as Phyllis, my counterpoint of the Dynamic Duo Associate Directors, has introduced me, my at-home perspective is a little bit different in that I live in Letcher County, which is one of the hardest hit areas of the flooding. Not probably the most hardest hit, but certainly devastating nonetheless, as I was in Washington, D.C. when the phone call came in that 8 inches of rain had fell in less than 6 hours. And so we were experiencing what I just frequently describe as apocalyptic weather. And if you could see the ground perspective, apocalyptic probably doesn't do it justice. Entire neighborhoods are washed away. And by that, I mean, they're literally gone. Frequently homes that are site construction homes have been lifted off their foundations and moved. And if it was a mobile home or a double wide, those have fared even worse. Some of those actually have been disintegrated. They're completely in parts and pieces all up and down a riverbank. And so when I returned home, I couldn't actually get home. I had to stay in another location until the connections to my bridge were reestablished so that I could get home. I am one of the fortunate few whose home was far enough from the water that it was not damaged. The actual structure was not damaged. Minor other damage from the flooding as a result of like a loss of power and some outdoor pieces that are gone, but considerably very minute compared to what everybody else is going through. So it's important to know a little bit about why it was so swift. You know, I've had to answer that question several times. And so just to give you some perspective, these are not homes that were built beside a river. These were homes or mobile homes that were set up beside a creek that very quickly turned into this rushing, raging water filled with mud And it rose to a flood level in Letcher County of 20.9 feet in what would be considered a 10.9 foot flood zone because of the way of the geography. And so the hills and the mountains, although mostly are protective when it comes to bad weather, especially things like tornadoes, in this particular situation, they became more so of a hazard than a barrier to protect us. And so rain had fallen the week previously, and there was lots of saturation in the ground, and the water came off those mountains at an accelerated rate because nothing was being absorbed. And so very quickly creeks turned into rivers, and in many cases people did not have adequate time to respond. I think I am accurate in that we were up to 39 deaths associated with the flooding. Unfortunately, some of those are children, and a lot of those are elderly or infirm. And so it is probably the most singular defining moment in this area for weather in probably the last 100 years by all accounts. The week immediately thereafter, there was no capability for me to work remotely as I do 4 days a week. Writ large, there was no internet. It's kind of hard to have internet when you have no home. And so I spent the week volunteering at Letcher County Central High School and or delivering out into remote parts of the county, and that lasted all the way through Saturday. It's hard to explain the devastation that you see, so I'm going to try to give you some perspective, and again, I wish to be brief. But if you can envision seeing mud 8 inches deep inside a doorway, or seeing homes that are 2,500 square foot that are now floated off and over to the side of where their foundation sits. Our local elementary school is like 5 miles upstream from my home, and it was in the midst of having a roofing repair. And so all these pallets of roofing tiles were sitting on top of the building. Some of those are now lodged at the base of my bridge, along with the dumpster that was at the base of the school. And so it's hard to kind of envision that, but it gets real when you're out in the community and in remote areas like Dean and McRoberts. And I know most of you will not be familiar with those areas, but they are very, very rural. And we saw people sleeping in tents and folks taking turns sitting watch, so to speak, when they were living in campers. Some of that obviously being fear of the weather, and some of it is being fear of, looters and opportunists who would take advantage of their misfortune. And so at one point, probably the hardest thing was the mother who was walking with these 2 little bitties beside the road to go get food because she had no car. And so, and living in a home that was still filled with mud. And it's important to know and to wrap your mind around that a little bit, because our students are not removed from that. If they are in a KCTCS school, we all know, because I was with Hazard for several years, we know that we share students a lot, especially in the online platform. And so it's hard to expect students to be able to concentrate on the task at hand when they're dealing with separation anxiety, especially when they're worried about their families at home. And my stepdaughter and my niece are prime examples of this. They're in their junior year at Moorhead, and both are concerned about being away from everything from what's going on here to they're very concerned about their pets because it's the last stitch of normalcy that they have. It's key to remember that these students, it's not that they don't want to finish an online assignment. They may not have access if they're at home. And I would encourage you all to, on your campus, to be the brokers of compassion and encourage faculty to be lenient and generous. There's plenty of time to play catch up, but what these students are dealing with mental health, especially if they've lost everything, may just be front of mind above any and all things. And so I am one of the core members of the team leading the long-term recovery group for Letcher County. And what I've stressed to our work team that is meeting on a fairly regular basis at this point is that the only thing stronger than fear is hope. And so we have to figure out how to get fear out of the driver's seat and put hope in its place and let it steer the ship for a while. And so that's what I hope we get from our conversation today, is ways and means to, first of all, be lenient with students and to work with students, and remember that their mental well-being right now is extremely challenged, especially if they were directly impacted by the floodwaters themselves and may have lost everything. but also to encourage them that brighter days are ahead. And so it's going to be a two-part of let's support you now, but let's help you focus on tomorrow. And so just thankful to be with you all today. Thankful to be able to share that experience. I know that I saw Nina Eddington from Hazards on here, and I'm sure Nina could share a few things from their areas. I've been in and out of Perry County as well as Knott County, and Breathitt County is probably, especially the Lost Creek area, it is absolutely apocalyptic. And so I'm going to turn this back over, Phyllis, because I don't want to go too long. I could talk forever about it. And just thank you for your time.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Beth, if we could maybe stay on a few more minutes. And so if there's anyone out there who wants to spend a few more minutes with Beth after the 3 o'clock hour, then we'll stay on for a little bit longer. But again, thank you so much for sharing. Now let's transition then to our partners from other states who have dealt with these issues. And I don't know if at the top of the hour I mentioned the name of this session that we're doing now, but we're calling it Disaster Response in Student Success. And so I would love for Dr. Valdez to come on and to share a little bit of the innovative and creative things that you all have done to take care of your students in times like this. And if you have other team members who are with us, please introduce them and have them to say a word or two. Feel free.
Thank you. Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you, Beth, so much. So thank you just everyone for having us here. It's a privilege to be here and support as much as we can. A quick couple of points before I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues with their different levels of expertise, which I think will be very, very helpful. Number one, it does get better. You become more resilient, you become stronger. We're at the heels of probably the closest thing that we have to that level of devastation. We're at the heels of 30 years of Hurricane Andrew in August of 1992. And if any of us remember, certainly it felt apocalyptic for a while. But the institution becomes very quickly a place of safety, a place of respite, a place of hope, a place of routine, of going back to a routine. And that's very, very important to our students. Certainly from us at FIU, we offer our condolences, especially, of course, for the lives lost, and very heartfelt empathy to everyone here. So I offer too that what we're going to offer now is going to focus a little bit more on that retention and completion and student support from that lens, because I'll share that at the onset of disasters, we have our emergency management group that convenes vice presidents from across the university and leads and volunteers that are basically meeting on a weekly basis at the onset of the disaster, sometimes daily and multiple times a day, until that obviously those pieces are in place, and then that starts to dissipate a little bit. So on that, I'm going to pass it on first and foremost to Dr. Leanne Wells, and I'm doing that. She's going to talk a little bit about the faculty lens and what we've done there, because Dr. Wells has to leave us in just a few minutes. So I'd like her to start. And then after her, I'm going to ask Dr. Laura Castillo to come in and really go through. We actually created a brief presentation, but I will ask Laura publicly. There's a little bit about FIU generally, so going through that very quickly so we can get to the actual practices that we have found very helpful to our work. So Dr. Wells.
I'd like to second Dr. Valdez and sending my love to all of you. So I want to talk a little bit about how we communicate with faculty, and I've already shared with Janie our most recent communications with faculty when we have had disaster or tragedy. One of them is about Hurricane Irma, and there's probably some language in there that could be very helpful. But then there's another one that is entitled Helping Students Respond to Multiple Tragedies, which might be more appropriate for a lot of you because there is so much impact and ongoing problems and experiences and difficulties and struggles that you and your students are going through. And that came out of that same year that we had Irma, We also had the Parkland shootings, and then not very long after the Parkland shootings, we had our own tragedy where we had a bridge collapse on traffic on our campus, and one of our students was there, and there were 6 fatalities, and that was students walking by that and seeing the remains of that was traumatic. If I could share screen for a second, I'd like to do that just to show you some of the things that we included.
Okay, your co-host.
Thank you. And again, I've said this along already. Oh, wait a second, what happened? Are you seeing helping students respond to multiple tragedies?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is actually, we had a teaching tip that we send out to our faculty. And this one was actually considerably longer than ones we've had in the past because there were so many things to address. But some of the first things to do are to acknowledge. The one thing that you might do that would be the worst possible thing would be to dismiss, and then the next worst would be to ignore. So we want to acknowledge that our students are struggling, that we're struggling, that tragedy occurred, and then, make space in the room for that acknowledgement that those things impact your ability to focus and to think. And it's not just an emotional response, it's a physical response, right? The brain just doesn't get the ability to do that kind of processing when it's in the fight or flight mode. So it's not even that they, just try harder, they won't be able to. So we actually reached out to one of our faculty, that's Dr. Rachel Ritchie, and she gave us some help and some tips. So that might be something useful at your institution, reaching out to some of the faculty that are already there and asking them how, this is a clinical psychologist, our students, our committees, our communities, our faculty, what advice would you give? Because then it's very important that it is about who you are as a community. And then there's some time that you might want to spend in class. Faculty will be able to do this in a way that is best for them, because some faculty have lost their homes too, or they've lost loved ones, or they're struggling with security, with food and shelter. So it might be that those discussions are brief. It doesn't have to be very long. You can talk about it briefly and say, we just want to acknowledge this. And if you feel like you'd like to share or just know that we're all here together, it might be a powerful moment. Taking a moment to breathe. We have a contemplative practices group here at FIU that works with faculty to bring that into the classroom, and sometimes just breathing or thinking about something that makes you happy. That might be hard at this time because it might be something that they lost. So maybe something they're proud of instead of happy, right? Or, because you might think of a pet that automatically comes to mind and they've just lost it. So that might be a challenge. So maybe something they're proud of. Inviting students to share their personal experience or response. Some students will feel this even though they have not lost anything. And they just feel very emotional about it. So recognizing that that's still a valid state of being. And I've read a couple of things about people blaming locals for voting, and how we want to get away from any kind of blame or debating, or this wouldn't have happened if these people didn't do this. A tragedy has occurred, a disaster has occurred, and being able to recognize that without pointing fingers might be a beneficial thing to talk about in class. It's less traumatic to have those conversations when painting fingers aren't there. And then sharing resources. If you do have the opportunity, and Beth did share, a lot of students are not going to have internet. That happened to us in Irma, but it also happened to us when we're having powerful tropical storms. So they might not have internet, or they might not just have the bandwidth to do that, to get on the internet. So reminding what resources are available, checking in if you have a food bank, how students can get help, and then making adjustments to your classes. Some of those things that you might want to do would be adjust course schedules. That's probably going to happen at the university anyway, but recognizing that when it comes to the start of the semester and things are already in disarray, that means the whole semester can be impacted, right? So Irma actually occurred with us, I think it was the second week of the semester to the third week of the semester, and just recognizing we're going to have to start all over again, right? We're not going to expect you to remember something that happened prior to a disaster or a tragedy for many people. So recognizing that, thinking of being empathetic and sympathetic, adjusting timing. You may have to cut some material out of your course to make it fit into the semester, instead of cramming it in, because they're not going to learn it anyway if you cram it. Commuting, recognizing the commuting might not work, and if there's no internet, there's also no way to Zoom, right? We wouldn't have those opportunities. And then trying to announce any changes in a written format as well as a verbal format. Again, that's going to be hard if students do not have the internet. It might be too early to do the next item here, which is bring the interest to the students. So because students are often motivated by big problems, big ideas. What can I do to help change the world? And somebody that is maybe in engineering, or maybe somebody that's in environmental science, or somebody that's in public health will now be inspired to fix something that they see is not working well, or help others avoid this kind of disaster in the future. That might be, it might be a little raw right now, so maybe it's later in the semester to do that, but that is something that can help students work through some of their feelings and some of the things that have happened to them. And then take care of yourselves, because it's hard for you. You're carrying the weight of a lot of emotions that the students are having. And some faculty are more connected to students than others and have emotional ties with them. But even if you are somebody that doesn't tend to form close relationships with students, feeling their emotional states is still going to impact you. So being aware that you're under, aside from all the stresses that you have dealing with the situation for yourselves, you're on the receiving end of a lot of emotional load. So I hope you can find a way to give yourself a break too. I don't think that I need to share the Irma one, because there's a lot of similar things in there, but there might be a little bit of language in there that it speaks to specifically disasters, and I'm sharing those with Janie. But you can contact me for other language. There's resources attached to both of these, so those might be useful as well. And I am here to help you in a way that I can.
Thank you so much, Leanne. That's very, very helpful as always. I'm going to also jump in now to my colleague Laura and ask Laura again. I think I will share the slides with Lily, so folks can read a little bit more about FIU and our student population, but if we can just actually go directly to the practices in the interest of time.
Sure. Can I get access to share, please? I'll be brief. Let me know. The only reason that I put slides about who we are and what our students are is because I think that's very relevant to our response, right? Our location, the types of disasters that we're prone to have a lot to do with what we experience, and then specifically, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
How our is it the right one? Like two screens. Our students in specific, so I'm just gonna put this. So our biggest experience with natural disasters is hurricanes. So we've experienced flooding, power loss, total loss. And specifically, a point that I wanted to make is because of our location and the students that we recruit, we get a lot of students from the Caribbean or from neighboring states that also experience hurricanes. So a lot of times it's not exact to our location, but neighboring or just students that we have from those locations. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well, because it's not always going to be really clear that a student's been impacted, because sometimes they're in the region or they're an international student and things like that. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. I sent this checklist, so I just wanted to quickly go over it. Defining the impacted area seems common sense, but those counties that are impacted, and the reason is this is important is because leadership wants to know, right? It's like, that's the number one thing. How many students do we have that may be going through something? This information is also powerful because not all students are going to come to you. Not all of them are going to say, my house has gone like it's nothing. Right? So being able to at least identify those areas, you can cross-check that with maybe students who have not enrolled, students who have past due balances, and other data points to help you find students that may be struggling that have not gotten to you yet. This was a lesson learned for us. You can assume, especially for students that are maybe first generation, who are trying to make it on their own, it can be really, really hard for them to ask for help, even when they're critical. So I think really understanding who your population is, how can you identify those students so that you can reach out to them is really critical. And then just basic needs, food, safe space. If your campus is in good shape, and you can open it up, right, for students to come, use the internet, talk to someone, that's something that you should make available. Financial assistance. I'm going to talk more in detail about these: academic support and community other support. So this is big for us. We're 50% first generation. So when disasters happen and FEMA rolls out benefits, or students' situations change, they don't know how to navigate that. They don't know how to report that their mom lost. Sometimes they have to help their parents with insurance documents. Like, there's all of these burdens that fall into the student. So helping those students file for food stamps, right? Or access FEMA benefits, right? For their parents, is something that can be really helpful. Red Cross, things like that, is something that is often forgotten, but that our students are in big need of. I'm sorry if I'm rushing. I'm just trying not to take up the whole time. And then communication, like Leanne mentioned, the compassion piece is really important. Students really need to feel like you hear them. For a lot of students, we're the only people that they interact with besides their family, right? Like, we're the only ones that they talk to. The only other place that they go, they may work and go to school, and that's it. So having us to kind of guide them through this is really important. Having multiple ways for them to reach you, whether it's like here, we do a lot of radio ads during emergencies. So like we'll pay for announcements to be made to the general public through the radio, because we know that the cell phones, the internet goes down. So that's something to keep in mind. Multiple ways, like a lot of people were talking about internet loss and stuff. So just having multiple avenues, putting something in the paper, so that students have many, many ways to reach us. Updating official websites and targeting communications to those that you identified. So a student that is in a devastated county should have a slightly different message than a student who may be impacted from a county that was farther out, right? We need to be intentional, right? We know who those students are, so we shouldn't give them some, if you need help. No, we know you need help. We know your entire county was devastated. Here's what we can do, right? And that takes a little bit of time and segmentation and stuff, but it's worth the effort, because the last thing you need is to add further stress or injury to a student who's already suffering. Timeliness is key. It's great if you're like, we're gonna help you. but then it takes 3 weeks for the student to get any sort of assistance. And that again adds insult to injury, right? So this is pretty much what we throw all our resources at when we first launch any sort of relief effort, is making sure we have staff to answer phones, to process anything that there is to process, applications, emails, support for everyone. Just making sure that we can do what we said we're going to do in a timely manner, and constantly gathering student feedback. A lot of times what you think they need is not what they need. So making sure that we're being open and we listen to what they need is key. And then key support. So obviously monetary, specifically for situations like this, students can't eat. They have a lot of personal expenses. It's not necessarily tuition needs at this point, though that may be for some students. You don't always need to gather new dollars. And this is more for like our financial aid folks or our finance folks. You can take existing aid that you have and leverage it to support students in need. If you need details on that, call me. I do this all the time. So we can talk about that, but you don't necessarily need to allocate new dollars or fundraise all of it. We fundraised for almost every disaster we've had, and that's how we've gotten students through. So that's a big vehicle for us. But you can also just support students in using the resources already available. So if a student may be able to submit a professional judgment to get more aid now that they've been impacted by this disaster, or take out loans or any of those things, again, you can identify those students and then have them do those things. Food pantry is another one. Non-monetary counseling and psychological services. Our team usually brings in extra counselors, or they'll do group counseling to kind of lessen the load on our psychologists. So that's really important. Again, the facilities and the referral to community services are very important. I'll talk briefly about this, and April can chime in if she has any additions, but this is really important as well, because if you can help a student, figuring out expenses for the month or some relief for them to get food or whatnot, but then if you're sending them emails about how they're failing their class, we're missing the mark, right? So I think having a central place where students can ask questions, academic questions, right? Once they're in that mind space is important. Extending advising in library hours, enhanced tutoring, early alert systems. We have an Ask Charlie or Ask Rory, which is kind of a central place where students can ask advising and course questions. And kind of with the faculty side as well, having faculty be supportive of students. And I'll never forget, there was a student who during Hurricane Dorian, she was from the Bahamas, and she lost her entire house. Like she had sent us video. It was devastating. And the reason she reached out was because her professor wouldn't give her an extension on something. And she, and we talked, it was easily remedied, but to the student, it really like meant a lot, like it really impacted them. So really just being like flexible and is very important. I don't know if April, you want to add anything to this academic support piece? No.
We can continue, Laura. Yeah,
Okay.
just we're waiting for someone
right.
else to jump in.
Perfect, okay. And then the lessons we learned. So disasters affect the entire university community in a lot of ways. It's not always clear upfront what the long-term impacts are. Like Leanne mentioned, don't forget about your staff yourselves, right? You can't fill from an empty cup. So it's important to support your staff who's on the front lines, dealing with a lot of heavy stuff that they may not be used to dealing with. Have a continuous improvement mindset, ask a lot of questions and collect data on how many students have reached out to you, what they are needing. That just helps with reporting and development. Support may not have a clear ending. That was a big one for us. we thought like, okay, the disaster's over, right? It's been a few weeks, everybody's in recovery, nobody else needs help, but really, for a lot of these students, this loss is incredibly devastating. So students are gonna need support 3, 4, 5 semesters out, right? If their parents lost their entire business and are not gonna be able to support them, right? Until that comes back up. So that's something to keep in mind. And there was one more thing I wanted to say. Just to remember, students are not always gonna self-identify. We can't leave it all up to them. We really have to make it as easy and as comfortable as possible for them to ask for help, for us to truly connect with them and make a difference. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was like record time. So I know we have Mark coming next. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I can say ditto to everything that FIU just said. One of the important things coming from, I guess, the academic leadership side is you've got to have a plan and know your plan and work your plan. You cannot be caught in a state of confusion because you're not going to be able to focus on the people that need you. So you've got to be prepared. In fact, I would recommend that leaders in the academic arena actually go through the National Incident Management System training. You can go to FEMA's website and go through those certifications. This gives you great insight on how to prepare for and get ready for disasters of almost any type. So you've got to have that expertise focused on taking care of the people rather than figuring out what they needed to do. Being informed also will help you interact with the first responders better. Engaging with them in a number of areas, being able to answer their questions and know what they need in order to best fulfill their duties as they try to lead through these disasters. In many cases, what you may find in a disaster is you are not the one that's impacted, but you become the haven. University of Louisiana Monroe is inland. So most of the hurricanes do their damage in South Louisiana. So we have right now 2 agreements in place with parishes in South Louisiana that use our athletic facilities as a disaster relief zone. So we have to be prepared for an influx of students who need to finish up classes while they're here. We're coming up on the 17th anniversary of Katrina. And when Katrina came through and took out New Orleans, a lot of students came to the University of Louisiana Monroe without academic records, and they had been in class for 2 weeks. So being able to work with those students, get them enrolled in our classes, taking care of faculty who've been displaced. Those faculty can assist you in teaching those students if they can. So being prepared for all of those eventualities really helps you focus on the students being successful. Along with that, you're going to get a lot of students coming into campus. So a lot of those students may be bringing their families with them. We discovered in one situation, one hurricane that came through, that we had a number of families living in the dorm room with their students. They just moved in from South Louisiana. How do you handle that? How do you take care of those eventualities? Our students sound very similar to those at FIU. We're in the Delta region in the country, one of the most socioeconomically challenged areas in the country. And so a lot of our students actually support their families monetarily in a variety of ways. So they're naturally going to bring them with them. How do you handle that? Campus security becomes incredibly important. One incident that occurred during one of the evacuations, the students had a post-hurricane party and ended up inviting someone who just walked onto campus to the party. Well, it turns out that person was a criminal, and it ended up landing a lot of people in trouble, and the university and the newspaper. So being sure that you keep very close attention on protecting your environment through this. A couple of things that we learned in those processes, the food bank was great, but people went through that food bank in a hurry. So we had to actually develop an alternative food source for our students, and partnering with local grocery stores, local restaurants that could actually help feed our students on campus. Realizing that our students off campus depend on us. a lot of our international students live very close by, not necessarily on campus, but when the disaster hit, they moved to campus. How do you handle that? And that's something that we didn't think about at the time, but with the increased frequency of these storms, we're going to have to deal with on a regular basis. I did work for a time in Oklahoma. Hurricanes weren't a problem there, but tornadoes were. So how do you handle that short, very devastating, very concentrated disaster is different than handling a hurricane. So being flexible in your planning, be sure you're ready for both types, needs to be on your radar as well. So we had a lot of the similar experiences FIU did, practiced a lot of the same things that FIU did, and found them to be great, very successful. So I can reinforce what they've done as best practices. But I also can tell you that one of the greatest things that we learned from Katrina, which was our first major one, was we needed to be better prepared. We needed to understand what the logistics of an evacuation meant. We needed to know how to handle students who were coming in without transcripts, how to handle faculty who are coming in that need work. And it really boiled down to, and ultimately this year, Louisiana prepared a statewide network of its universities so that we can freely exchange information and ideas and be able to contact each other readily whenever disaster hits any one of our institutions that have protocols in place, get our students taken care of. So with that, Janie, your team has done a phenomenal job. I know y'all are in a very difficult situation, so I applaud your efforts there. It sounds very similar to many of the ones that we did here.
Thank you so much, Mark, and likewise.
Wonderful. So just want to thank both of our institutions for coming on today and shedding some light and providing perspective on all of the things that we're thinking about right now in Kentucky. Because of time, we're surely going to stay after 3 o'clock. If you have additional comments, reflections, I see there are a couple of questions being posed now in the chat. So what we'll do is just go ahead and open the floor. So if there is anyone who is feeling the need to ask a question of either of our guests and their teams, please come off of mute. Feel free to come off camera as well and introduce yourself and ask your question.
I've got a question from Lily. I'm going to put the link in the chat of what I mentioned.
Okay.
I was actually first exposed to this when I moved to Oklahoma because tornadoes unfortunately are routine out there. And it was part of my job as provost I was required to do this training. That way I could go through and assist the first responders and be able to coordinate efforts on campus. And fortunately, I didn't have to use it while I was there, but after going through it, I can see where it'd be incredibly useful to go through those. And there's about 10 to 14 courses that you can go through. Usually the 100, 200, 300, and 400 of ICS for administrators is excellent. And it'll get you behind the scenes in the mindset of that. So, and it's the first 4 that's under the list under the ICS NIMS courses when you get to the site. I found those to be incredibly helpful. Guess we got Lori. How did the disasters you experienced impact student success metrics over time? A lot of the students that came to ULM from Southern Louisiana continued on to graduation. I saw the numbers not coming to me. That study was done. And we were able to keep a lot of those students who came here on track. Some of those students actually transferred to ULM after that took place because, quite frankly, many of the campuses in Southern Louisiana were gone. There's a lot of institutions just wiped out. So we were able to help them matriculate to their degree there. But for the most part, they did pretty well. You are going to have students, though, who are going to struggle, and the students who struggle will surprise you. Sometimes it's your highest performing students that struggle the most. So I wouldn't make any assumptions whatsoever about who's going to be impacted in what way. Some of our students that actually were academically challenged powered through and did well when they did there. So the disasters affecting our faculty, quite honestly, had a little bit of greater impact. They had to shift gears midstream. A lot of the students, like with Katrina, came in 2 weeks into the semester. So they actually had to retread a lot of those students to get them back in place. So it threw them off timeline. So they had to adjust. Quite frankly, though, I think in the long run, it helped everybody to go through. So paying very close attention to your faculty's needs is important here because they're going to be on the front line of many of it. I would also recommend, and we saw this too, those students are going to be impacted health-wise. So those that have health programs like nursing, PT, OT, counseling can be brought to bear in these circumstances and do quite well. The last evacuation that we had here, the city, the region heavily relied on our nursing program. Our nursing faculty did an outstanding job taking care of all the evacuees from South Louisiana who had medical issues. We were able to put everybody in the Coliseum on cots and be able to take care of those. But it was a great lift for all of them. But we were fortunate that we could provide those services. So I think it was a strengthening time, honestly. I think Janie said it absolutely well. It's going to get better. And when you're doing this, you do have to think about what it looks like on the other side and what your impact does. So, but I think overall, when we studied this, the student success metrics over time, they went down a little bit, just like they did with COVID, but it wasn't to the extent that you would expect.
We also had the same experience, just to share in Mark's, and I think what helps too is to Laura's point about, thinking ahead, right? We don't know that end date, that you can make up some of that lost time during summers, for example. So incentivize summer enrollment, make up some credits that may have been lost here and there, but not making assumptions about these are the students that are going to be impacted. We're not going to see them. That's not really there. You may have a little bit of extension time to degree completion, but they will complete. They will complete. And again, years ahead, right? Years ahead, whatever that looks like. One thing that actually at FIU that we didn't expect is we have a disaster management degree now, and it's thriving. Students are interested in this work now, right? You get that experience and you said, this is how I want to help. We have to do better at this. So just interesting things that occur that you just don't see at the moment for your institution.
At the risk of sounding like a parrot, Janie, we're doing the same thing. We've been identified as like I said, a disaster haven. And so we're going to implement an academic block in disaster recovery and management. So a lot of students are going to be interested in that. It's going to involve everything from our atmospheric sciences program all the way to our insurance program. So it'll be completely multidisciplinary from all aspects of campus. So.
There is a question in the chat. Let's see, do most institutions have student success protocols of how to respond to disasters, or are response teams formed when disasters occur? That's from our colleague at Berea.
My experience, the answer to both those questions is yes. And I sound like an accreditor when I say that, I get that. But it really depends on the area of the country you're in. There are some places like Louisiana where we're dealing with hurricanes every year. And so we have an extensive list of protocols. In fact, I sent Melissa Bell a number of copies of our protocols from the state of Louisiana on how we handle and address hurricanes. Some institutions have their own. A lot of this is coordinated through the governor's office so that we make sure that everybody's on the same page. Other places that I've served more inland, it's more of an ad hoc basis. For instance, in places like Arkansas and Missouri, you don't see quite the number of hurricanes, obviously, up there, but you do see a lot more acute disasters such as bridge failures, local flooding, so on and so forth. So in some cases, it's ad hoc.
Got it. Other questions? I see we have about 3 minutes left, but we're going to stay on just a little bit longer, if that's okay with FIU. And Dr. Arant, if that's okay with you as well. All right, any other
Okay.
questions, ideas, thoughts, reflections? I do want to take a second and thank Dr. Lori Couch at Moorhead, our provost at Moorhead, for bringing this idea around the resources and this being a gathering space to hear from other institutions. So thank you so much, Dr. Couch, and others have just followed suit in their interest. And we know this is a discussion that will continue. So please be on the lookout for follow-up information for how we can continue the discussion. And if it's okay, I know some of you will have to jump here pretty quickly. I'll go ahead and speak to the resource. There's a platform, a repository platform that we now use called the Impact Exchange. And so you can find it on our website for the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative, but I'm going to send it to you tomorrow. We're going to package the recording, get all the things that we want you to have beyond this connection space. And we'll put links, appropriate links, so that you can go in and review any and everything. There's a ton of resources in there already, but if you are not a member or you haven't joined the Impact Exchange, you'll have a little bit of work to do. It's not that hard, creating your account, your profile, and all of that, and then you get access to all the goodies. So with that, I will see if there is any other final thoughts or questions. Anything from my team? Beth, Lily, any other comments or sharing that you care to?
I think this was incredible, and I appreciate everyone so much for sharing their perspective. We did have over 80 people register for this, and so what we're thinking is that we might have follow-up webinar conversations on more specific topics. I know that Janie, you had mentioned your director of your counseling center plays a huge role in the response to different disasters. And so bringing in that mental health as a focus area for a future conversation is something that we'd love to offer to our colleagues here in Kentucky. So you'll hear more information on that as it kind of emerges, but it's just been a wonderful session, and I thank everyone for joining us.
Yes, I agree. If there are no other questions or anything, again, I want to thank our colleagues from FIU and UL Monroe, and we will see you on the other side in the form of an email with links. All right, thank y'all so much for coming into the family room, and have a wonderful day.
Bye.